Hello everybody, thanks for joining us for another edition of FreightWaves Now. It's Tuesday, hoping you're having a great day so far. We're going to be joined in just a little bit by the Sultan of SONAR, Zach Strickland. He'll be talking about what's going on in the freight markets today, bringing you up to speed on all the latest news, and we'll look at some sonar charts. But first, we're going to start with the weather with yours truly, meteorologist Nick Austin. We're going to go to the maps and see what's happening. We do have more winter weather. Of course, it is still winter, technically until March 20th on the calendar. But the snow today is really going to be causing problems. It has been all day across the Pacific Northwest, the Cascade Mountains, particularly eastern Oregon, up into eastern Washington as well through Spokane. And that's going to be heading into Montana, where in the Great Falls area up to Cut Bank, right along the I-15 corridor, and right along the Continental Divide in western Montana, blizzard warnings. Not because they're expecting a ton of snow to be falling today. There's already a lot of that on the ground. They'll get a few more inches today, but the winds are going to be really, really strong across those parts of Montana with gusts of 60 to 70 miles an hour. So horrible travel weather there. We're seeing also rain and snow across parts of the Four Corners region down in the southwest. Mountain snow, valley rain across that area. We're watching that system closely. It's not going to cause major problems today, just kind of typical winter stuff across that region. But later tonight and especially through Wednesday, that storm is going to be scooting right up into the Great Plains, and it's probably going to be strengthening into a major snowstorm, probably a blizzard across parts of northeast Colorado, Nebraska tomorrow, and across the Dakotas. And eventually by Thursday, even up into parts of the Midwest. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that storm as well. Those are the only big weather problems today as far as trouble spots across the country. So we're going to go ahead and get out of weather, and we're going to go to Zach Strickland, and we'll start really talking about what's going on in the freight markets today. So what's the big topic that we're going to focus on first, Zach?
Well, we're going to pull up the Outbound Tender Rejection Index for the United States of America because we see this big old dip happening down here at the end.
A big old dip, yes.
We dropped below 7% on the Outbound Tender Rejection Index for the first time ever.
Ever?
Ever. So big news today. So we've seen...
What does that mean then exactly? Yeah.
So essentially, you know, carriers are accepting just about everything they can get their hands on right now. Volumes did come up last week. That was the big story of the week last week. We had volumes increasing throughout the country in general. We broke 10,000 on the index for the first time in a while. Kind of a big breakout moment for the freight markets because we were kind of hesitant because of all the kind of negative news about the economy and the tariffs and everything kind of coming out. We didn't know if we'd actually kind of break that year-over-year boundary. Well, we did. The problem is that the market is in balance. So a lot of the capacity was on the West Coast where all the volume is, et cetera, et cetera. And it just simply hasn't shown up in the rest of the country. So the fact that we really haven't had that big destabilizing moment like we had last year, and it really continues to actually get even more stable. The Outbound Tender Volume Index is now sitting around 98.30, somewhere in that range right there, indicating about a 1.7% decrease year over year in terms of volume.
So a lot of loads being accepted. What about capacity?
Yeah, no, there's plenty of capacity right now.
Good,
yeah.
Okay.
So there's a lot of trucks out there ready to gobble up a bunch of this freight.
Excellent.
And we pulled this out, and this is the regional chart. So this is the Outbound Tender Rejection Index for several of the bigger regions in the country. We don't have all of them pulled up here because the Mountain Prairie, a little bit volatile.
Yeah.
and the Northwest, again, a little bit volatile, but they're both kind of doing the same thing in general. Like the direction you can kind of see down here at the end, a lot of these bigger markets, specifically the Midwest, which of course is frozen solid right now.
That's the one in the blue line right here. That's the Midwest, right?
Yeah,
okay.
the tender rejections are the highest in the country in the Midwest right now, followed closely by the Southwest, which would include like Texas and New Mexico and places like that. Maybe it's not technically the Southwest, but it's, you know, in that direction. And then the West Coast. Down here, you see this 2.26, by far and away leading the country. The West Coast
is low.
Yeah, that's California, Arizona, and Nevada. So that's kind of the freight region that has the most capacity in it right now, which is basically what we've been talking about, is lots of volume coming out of this place, but everybody knows about it. So all the carriers have figured it out. But not only that, but they've been stuck out there. The volumes are moving intra-regionally right now. So when they get the loads into LA, they basically bounce between, you know, Northern California, Phoenix, and they just keep moving amongst themselves, if you will.
They never are staying kind of close to home.
They're right in that same area, so they can't really break out. And you know, you're kind of seeing the market just hasn't had that moment where we see anybody really changing their pattern. You see how flat these lines are over the last month or so, month and a half? We really had a couple of little bumps or hitches.
It's looked fairly steady until this last drop.
Yeah, this last drop is actually not, I mean, for carriers or somebody that's looking to kind of see an indication that the market's going to pick up, I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world because volume is relatively high, but it's just simply not picking up. And that being said,
some good news.
Yeah, it's not terrible, but it's not great. You really want to see something that indicates like the market itself is kind of saying, okay, increasing volumes, increasing, you know, any kind of activity would be a good sign for the overall. And this is the outbound tender market share tree map. Again, organized from the top left to the bottom right in terms of size, relative size to the overall market. You see a lot of red on here in these bigger markets. So that's an indication that volumes have decreased in relation to the rest of the country. And that's not a great sign because these are the markets that kind of drive overall volume
big markets
in the country.
like Atlanta.
Yeah, exactly.
Places like that, so.
Only 60 out of the 135 markets had an increase in volume yesterday. And that's, you know, so that's below 50%. You kind of want to see on a trending scale, you want to see like more than 50% of the markets having an increasing value. And that's it's about 48% of the overall market is represented in those 60 markets. Wow. So Ontario starting to pick back up a little bit. Atlanta had actually taken over the #1 spot for a brief moment in time, 451. Followed by a 440. So Atlanta, we thought Atlanta might start to kind of show up because this is the time of year where the southern part of the southeastern part of the United States starts to see increasing volumes, along with Dallas and Houston and whatnot.
Getting closer to springtime.
Exactly. You say Lakeland, Florida down here, really showing an increase in volumes. You know, it's still a backhaul market. There's still a lot more inbound than outbound down there, but this market is really starting to pick back up for the carriers that are interested in that region. That's one that we always watch to see in the kind of the early spring, all the produce and the seasonal run starts to pick up out of there.
Now, sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned that places like Atlanta and other markets in the South usually do pick up in the spring, but what do you think is kind of causing this recent kind of reduction in the relative volume to the rest of the country?
Well, I think
for these big places, markets like Atlanta.
Appropriate for you. I think the weather actually has a big impact on this. And this is kind of a long run. Nobody really understands that people kind of stay indoors during when it's cold. Like the Midwest has been frozen solid, like you talk about all the time. And people don't get out and renovate their houses. They don't start new projects. They simply just stay inside. Like it's not worth their energy to get outside and start doing this activity. Activity creates basically production. I mean, if people are just sitting indoors and watching TV or getting on their phones, they're not really doing anything. They're not buying things. I mean, they could be buying on Amazon or whatever, but
they're not getting. But what about a place like Atlanta that's not necessarily bitterly cold?
We've been soaking wet down here, Nick. It's been raining for the past 3 months.
It's the rain.
Yeah. So it's keeping everybody kind of packed in. This is probably going to have an actual real climatological effect on some of the harvests as well. I'd be curious to see if they're, especially coming out of the California markets where they've had significant amount of rain. So there's probably going to be some delayed harvest impacts because the wetter it is, it actually pushes the harvest schedule off. So that's something that we're thinking about, but there hasn't been any kind of big push yet. I think appropriate for you, the weather is probably the key to that at this point in time, along with other macroeconomic stuff, obviously. But generally, that's when we used to see the biggest pushes in freight volume is when everything started to thaw out in earnest. But yeah, that's the way it is right now.
Well, as they say, spring is just around the corner, so we'll see what happens. March 20th is when spring officially starts on the calendar. There'll be parts of the country where it won't feel like spring because winter is going to last for a little bit longer. But we hope that you join us each and every weekday at 4 o'clock on FreightWaves.com. You'll see our FreightWaves Now video there. We want to thank Zach Strickland for joining us again today. And we hope that you have a great day. We hope that this information was useful to you, and we hope that we'll see you again tomorrow. Chad Prevost should be back as your regular host coming back for your Wednesday edition, and we hope we'll see you then.